Lucas here again with N2V Solutions, and today we are going to go over how to set up and configure a Grandstream UCM IP-PBX appliance. There are three different units. There's the 6100 series, the 6200 series, and the 6510. All three of them use basically the same software, so the setup is the same. The difference is the hardware. So the 6100 series was replaced by the 6200 series, which can handle 500 endpoints and 30 concurrent calls, maybe even 40. Does pretty well. The 6510 series has a T1, E1, J1 port that accommodates those types of connections. It can handle 2,000 endpoints and 200 concurrent calls. So for the small business, the 6200 series is fine. For the bigger, the 6510 might be more in your ballpark. And either way, the configuration is the same, and we're going to go through how to set that up today. As always, if you want to support us, the best way to do that is to like and subscribe. So you should see buttons for that, and if you would do that, it really helps us out. So without further ado, let's get started.
Let's take a look at the 6200 series IP-PBX appliance. This is the same software on the 6100 and the 6200 as well as the 6510. On all three of them, they function and operate the same. They are programmed the same. The hardware, however, is slightly different. Let's take a look at the physical piece of hardware that goes with the 6202 appliance. Now, the last number of your appliance, 620204, tells you how many of the FXO ports are on the appliance. FXO ports, these are the ports that go out to your provider. So if you were going to bring an analog line in, you'd plug it into an FXO port. The FXS ports are the ones you connect to a station or a device. So like a telephone, a fax machine, and all appliances, no matter what, only have two ports. So if we had a 6204, it would have two FXS ports and four FXO ports. The WAN and the LAN port, just what you'd think. The WAN would typically connect to an outside connection, get a static IP address. The unit itself can act as a router, and so it can hand out DHCP, all that kind of stuff, out through the LAN port, which would connect to your network. If you already had a router in place, you would just use your LAN port and program all your DHCP and all that through your router. If you're going to use both ports, they don't have to be WAN and LAN. Some of the units actually now say LAN 1 and LAN 2. Because you can make that second port to be a WAN port, to be another LAN port, and you can use it in any way you see fit. The LAN port is the one that will have PoE in the end. When you first set it up, you have to log in through the WAN port typically, and then program your LAN port to what you want to be, and then reboot it. The front interface will help you set the DHCP mode or static mode for your port any way you want, as well as do a factory reset. The functionality of this screen is pretty limited, but it gets the basic pieces done if you need to access your system. You have lights for connectivity on your LAN port, your WAN port, USB and SD ports, your FXS ports, which is for phones or faxes, and your FXO ports, which are your telco lines. The SD card is in the back. We put one in every unit. It's important that you use an SD card or a USB so that you can save recordings or do backups regularly. If you want to do automatic backups, you either need a FTP server to send things to or a card in here to hold all of that data. The USB port will support huge hard drives. I've put a couple terabyte one on these before and it works just fine. It does have the power port as well, but if you're using PoE, you don't necessarily need that. The reset button here on the back will do a factory reset for you if you ever need it, but it's important that you make note of all of the ventilation on here. This thing will overheat if you do not keep it clear of other hot devices. So I have set them on other switches before, and it works just fine as long as there's nothing stacked on top of it. If you start stacking things on top of here, you will overheat the unit. So it's important you don't do that. It is wall mountable, so you can see all that on here for those ports. It does take a 12 volt 1.5 amp power adapter, and it's pretty universal as far as that is concerned, as long as you meet the power requirements listed on the back. And that is the 6200 series IPPBX by Grandstream.
All right, we are going to start configuring our Grandstream UCM 6202 series IPPBX appliance. This is the phone system that handles all of the routing for all of your phones. Out of the box, the system will come with a dynamic setup on the WAN port and a static setup on the LAN port. So you can connect to the UCM whichever way you see fit. If you want to plug it into your local network, to start, you need to plug it into the WAN port. It will grab DHCP, and you can find that on your router or on the screen of the UCM what the IP address is, and log into it. If you plug into the LAN port, that will have that static IP address on it that will be in your little manual that comes with the appliance, and you can configure your computer to be on the same network as that IP address, and you would be able to log into it. Once you get in, you can change the network settings to be whatever you want, and reboot it, and away you go. But you have two different ways to log in. Once you set your network settings the way you want them, the LAN port is the one that you will use to connect to your network, as well as what you would use for PoE. Having said that, our system is already set up, so we're going to go through the process of factory resetting as well as upgrading this system. I'm going to log in, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the upgrade. Now you can see I've got all kinds of stuff on here. This is my test system, so I don't care if you see stuff. I'm not going to blur things out for you. It's all going away anyway. And I know my IP address of my system because I set it statically just as I described. Now, in the left side of the system here is your categories of information that we are going to go through each one of these sections to let you know what's where. But to start, I'm going to jump ahead and go down to maintenance and go to upgrade. To upgrade, you need to have the firmware already downloaded on a server or something on your network so you can direct the system to it. The phone system, the UCM, will not upgrade automatically. I guess it will, but you have to tell it where to go. Typically, I always go to choose a file, so you don't want to screw this one up. You want to make sure it gets here. So if you can do this on site or physically, like I'm doing now, if you were remoted in, that would work too. But choosing a file to upload rather than giving it a path, I find always works better. In this case, I've already got my firmware downloaded. Let me show you where to find that. If you open a browser and you navigate to firmware.grandstream.com, it will redirect you straight to their support firmware tab on their website. You scroll down, you get all of their different types of hardware, and you go down to IPPBX appliance. Now, it shows you the currently released firmware, and it shows you the beta firmware. I'm already on this current release, so we're going to upload the beta firmware in this case, just for the sake of showing you how it's done. Now, as you can see, there's a 61XX, a 62XX, and a 6510. If you need an older firmware, you can click on this previous firmware button and get it there. In this case, if I wanted the 1017.16 firmware, I just click right here, it would start downloading. For the beta, I click over here, and it gives me choices. Which system do I want the beta firmware for? I click the middle one, and it will download. So I've already done this, so I'm going to skip this step, but you would click this, download the firmware, extract it from its folder, and put it in a place of your choosing. I have already placed it in my firmware folder. In this case, we're going to jump right to the 10.18.9 firmware for the UCM 6200, and we're going to open. As soon as I click open, it's going to start upgrading this system. So we're going to let that sit for a little bit, and we're going to talk about how we configure a phone system. You don't want to dive into a phone system without a plan. So the first thing you're going to need is to write it out. How to set up a UCM. I wrote out everything I plan to do in this video and everything I want to show you to get the basics going. Now I'm going to show you a lot more than this, but this is the setup that I need. I'm going to upgrade it, and then I'm going to factory reset it to give everything a fresh, clean slate. We're going to go through an overview of what all of these buttons do, and we're going to make a route diagram. And off of that diagram, we're going to set up extensions, voicemails, follow me settings, ring groups and queues, IVRs. We're going to go through then and double check our destinations and all of those, and you'll understand that a little bit later. We're going to set up trunks. Trunks can be VoIP trunks and analog trunks. If you have a 6510, there can be other trunks as well. But the trunk is the way that you connect your phone system to the phone world. We're going to set up outbound routes and inbound routes. We will be using SIP trunks in this case, so we're going to set up the external host, and we'll explain what that means. And there's a few other miscellaneous settings. So this is my list that we're going to go through and use to keep us on track. I'm going to slide that off the screen. Now, the first thing we do is set up the route diagram. This is a very simple route diagram that I've created, and I'm going to walk you through it. You can do this on a spreadsheet as well, however you need to do to make sure you understand the flow of every single phone number you're bringing into this system. So I made some fake numbers, and we're gonna use all of these fake numbers in our setup, just so you can see how the routing is different for each one. 888-555-1230, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then a range of numbers from 6200 to 6300. And we're going to send those as DIDs to their extensions. And we're going to explain how to do all of this. So this first number, 1230, is going to go to an IVR. An IVR is another word for that would be auto attendant. It's a voice-activated answering service that is all automated. Thank you for calling. Press 1 for sales. Press 2 for technical support. Press 3 for payroll. Press 4 to get to an on-site tech. Press 5 if you'd like to leave a voicemail. Something like that. And you have all of these options. And then IVR. Option number 2 goes to IVR2. So we need to know what IVR2 is. And that's listed over here. This is what IVR2 is with its options. And the next number goes to a ring group. And that ring group has to have extensions in it. And it's going to end at IVR1 or a voicemail or something like that. And we're going to look through what that looks like. We're going to have this one go to a call queue, which is going to ring forever, with an exit option to voicemail. And then we're going to have this one going to an outside number, just like option 4 goes to an outside number. And we're going to show you how to set all of that up. But you need to know what path, what flow each of your numbers is going to take before you start. Now, why do I need to know that? Why do I have to have that all laid out? Why can't I just punch in my number and tell it where I want to go? Because you have to work backwards. You start with this, and it's going to an IVR, which is going to ring groups and IVRs and queues, which in turn are going to other ring groups and IVRs and queues, and in the end are going to extensions and to voicemails. So before we can start making a number, we've got to know what voicemails we need to create. And before we can make those voicemails, we've got to create those extensions. And once we create those extensions and apply the right voicemails, then we can make the ring groups. And once we've made the ring groups, then we can make the IVRs. And once we've made the IVRs, then you can go back and make the numbers. So even though you want to start with the numbers, you can't. You work through your build, and you start at the end, and you work your way back. So that's what we're going to do. Our system has successfully upgraded. It prompts us to reboot. So we're going to hit OK, and it is going to reboot. So now we are going to go through how to factory reset your unit. We're going to start by logging in. And if you plan on restoring your system, make sure you've done a backup already. If you don't have a backup, you won't be able to restore your system. You'll have to build it from scratch. So we're going to start by jumping down to maintenance. I'm going to upgrade. This is where you upgrade the system. Backup. This is where you do a backup of the system. The third option down here is System Cleanup and Reset. This is where you do your factory reset. These three buttons will not show up if you have not logged in as the admin. If you logged in as any other username, it will not work. So, in here you can come in and delete all voicemails. You can delete all CDR records or backup files. Or you can say, I want to delete everything. This is all user data. Now if I click all, it's going to just give me that option. It's like hitting the all button. Or I can just come down here and hit reset, and it will reset all. And that's what we're going to do. So I hit reset. Ooh, I got to select all and then hit reset. Let's try it again. And it's going to automatically reboot the system and come up like a brand new system. Now, the neat thing about a factory reset is it will not take it back to the out-of-the-box setting. The out-of-the-box setting says that the WAN port has a dynamic setup on its network port, and the LAN port has a preset static IP address in place. So the factory reset will take it back to out-of-the-box settings now. So the WAN port has a dynamic IP address, and the LAN port gets a static IP address. The LAN port cannot be turned to DHCP from the LCD menu. Let me show you. So right now we have the system plugged into PoE on the LAN port. The WAN port does not have PoE on it, so only the LAN port can be used for PoE. So you either need to connect the WAN port to your network so that it can grab a dynamic address, you log in, and you set your static IP to what you want it to be. Or you have to move your cable from LAN to WAN if that's the only one you have available. You may have a full switch or something like that. So I wanted to show you how to switch from the LAN to the WAN port without losing your power. If you click on the LCD menu, just to show you this part, and you hit the down arrow, you'll see View Events, Device Info, Network Menu. Network Menu is usually where you flip from static to dynamic. You hit OK on that, and you'll see WAN mode, static routes reset, and back. You only get those three options. If you could change the LAN mode, you would see WAN mode and LAN mode, but the only one you can change is WAN mode. If you click OK on that, you'll see the option of DHCP or static. If you ever have it set statically, you can flip it to dynamic on this screen here. We're not going to do anything with it. I just wanted to show you where it was. In this case, I'm going to back out to the main menu and just leave it as it is. All right, I don't even have to back up, but I did. Now on the main menu, it says right off the bat, IP disconnected. That's because it's seeing what's in the WAN port. If you hit the down arrow twice, you'll see IP disconnected again. Oh, where is it? Should give you my static address on there, but it's not. So what we're going to do is we are going to plug in your power cord. which you've required. It's the same 12-volt power cord, and the system will not power on. Then you can unplug the LAN port, and it stays powered on, and plug it into the WAN port. This should change from IP disconnected to a dynamic IP address that your network gives. Wait a second for that. And it's not giving me. The LAN one doesn't have any more either. Alright, so we're going to reboot it. 2 ways to reboot. You arrow down to factory menu, and reboot is the top option. And we're going to let that grab an IP address. It'll take a couple minutes, and we'll be right back. All right, the system came back up, grabbed a dynamic address just like it should have, and we're going to log right in and get this switched over to a static address. To do that, what is it? If you do not have a certificate on your system, you'll have to say advanced and proceed anyway, which is safe because you're local and everything's fine. There's no security issue. And the default password traditionally is admin and admin. But if you've got one of the newer units, they have started putting the password on the bottom so that admin is not what is required. Time update. Successfully, a reboot is required. Okay, so we got the new time, but I don't need to reboot right now to make that work. So we cancel that. The wizard here at the start can be used to set up basic settings through a little guide. We're not going to use that. We are going to just quit that and go to the setting, right to the setting we want. To get to your network settings, you go down to System Settings and Network Settings, and this is where you'd set it up. The method in which you will use is currently set to route, which means if you plugged into the LAN port, it would have given out an IP address. We're going to switch it to switch mode because we're only using the LAN, and we're going to grab a static address, which I have already preset if I remember all of my settings. Let's just do Google. All right. Just save that and reboot. Now this is going to make the LAN port my port. I'm going to reboot by switching my port. Because I don't want to reboot twice, I'm going to go back here and there we go, apply the changes. Normally the reboot applies the changes, but I make sure I cancel and apply the changes. And then I'm going to swap the cable from WAN to LAN first, which I'm just going to unplug it completely. And then I'm going to unplug the unit from power, and that's my shutdown. And then I'm going to plug the LAN port with my PoE and let that be what boots back up. That should allow my system to come back up with the original static IP that I had, and we can get started. We'll be right back. So our system has been successfully factory reset and set back to its original static IP address so that we can take a look at the inner workings here. Let's have a look. We start by logging in with the default username and password. In this case, it's admin. It is possible for the factory reset password to be on the bottom of your system. Right off the bat, normally the setup wizard comes up, and I quit that last time to go in and set my static IP address. If you ever want to return to that wizard, you simply click Setup Wizard up here, and it will walk you through that setup wizard all over again. So if you like the setup wizard, go ahead and use it. There's no harm in it. It helps you reset the password, set your network settings, time zone, extensions, some trunks, that sort of thing. We are not going to use the setup wizard. We are going to go through it on our own. But for now, we're going to go through an overview of the whole system. What is it we're looking at? Why are all of these tabs here? How are they relevant to me? And why do I need them? We're not going to touch on every single thing in detail, but we're going to give you a general idea. So to start, if I hit the up arrow here, that section goes away. Each one of these sections is a category that has items underneath it that we're going to look at. If you like your screen bigger, you can even hit this top button and shrink it down even smaller. But all those things are still there, and you can quickly access them in any way you want. On this screen, you have your general dashboard. It's under System Status, and it will show you details about your system. The system has hard drive space, which is what this talks about here. How much space is being used, the data partition and the configuration partition. They separate these two out so that your data can be viewed separately from your configuration. From there, it goes over here and shows how busy your memory is on the UCM and how fast and hard your CPU is working. If either of these hit 100%, things aren't going to work right. You're going to have a problem. So if you hit your dashboard and the first thing you see is that one of these is sitting at 100% and not dropping down, that's a problem. Right out of the box, nothing configured, 11% memory usage, 1% CPU usage. Over here you have the external ports. I showed you that USB drive and the SD spot, and this will show you if something's connected. Right now there's nothing in the USB, and I do have an SD card. It's about an 8 gig card, and about a gig of it is used up. So a quick overview of that. If you create trunks, analog trunks, VoIP trunks, any kind of trunk, it will be listed here and tell you its status. Blue being available, so it's working. Yellow means it's in use. The red is something's wrong, something's not right. And gray doesn't necessarily mean anything other than we're not keeping an eye on it for you. It could be working, might not be working. We don't really care. It's just not being monitored. So not good, not bad, but does show you that the trunk is there. The interface status, it tells you which things are plugged in. Right now our USB is not plugged in. Our SD card is plugged in. We have 2 ports. We have the LAN port, and that LAN port can be using PoE. Right now the LAN port is connected and PoE is in use. So it tells us a lot of stuff there. FXS, S is your stations. It is the analog phones and faxes. Nothing's plugged into it. FXO, that's your outside lines that you get from the telephone company, and nothing's plugged into those right now either. All the way on the left here, we have our PBX status. This shows you your time, your active calls, extensions, conference rooms, call queues, parking lots. It tells you if dynamic defense is on, fail to ban, if you have scheduled backups turned on or not, if you have any automatic synchronizations turned on, if you have the automatic cleaner turned on. So it's a quick overview of the basics of the phone system that many people want to know about. So up here, to go over these 4, if you have an active call currently going, this should have a 1 on it. If that active call is in a parking slot, you might lose this and go down to 0, but this will turn to a 1. It tells you how many extensions you have on the system and how many are currently registered. It tells you how many conference rooms you have and how many are currently in use. Same with queues. So it gives you a lot of information as we go, and you can use this page to quickly determine if things are working the way that they should be. Next one down, system information. It gives you a quick overview of what firmware version you're using. In this case, it is the program version that we're looking at, 10189. That's what we just updated to and installed. The top part tells you the type of system you have, 6202, and which version of hardware you have, which could be relevant if Grandstream asks you for that information. Something goes wrong, okay, what system do you have, what version is it? It has a part number, it tells you the current system time. If your system time isn't right, it can mess up other things. So always make sure your system time is up to date and working. Uptime, this is a neat one. This tells you how long the system has been running since its last restart. This can get into many, many, many days. I try to make sure I restart them at least once a year. I've had systems run flawlessly for well over a year without any problems. It just keeps going and going and going. I've had other systems I've had to reboot them every couple of weeks. A lot of times it has to do with the SIP trunks and the network traffic and the internet provider and things that we can't always control. And so a reboot just helps everything correct itself. And this tells you how long it's been since your last one. Active calls, anytime there's a call coming in that is actively going, it's going to list here. You'll see it ringing all the phones, you'll see where it's going, who's talking on it. If you have a call coming in and then going out to a cell phone, it will show both of those. If you have a call in park, it will not show it here. So that's where having your dashboard up and going, okay, I have 3 active calls and 2 people in park. You can then flip to active calls, see your 3 active calls, but you won't see the 2 park slots. So make sure you're always watching that dashboard if you're checking for active calls. Because if somebody's in park and you want to reboot the system, the dashboard will give you better information. The network status, I've never really used this page, but it tells what things are connected on which ports, what they're doing. If that's relevant to you, this is where you find that information. So there's lots of stuff. The next category is extensions and trunks. This is where you make the majority of the items that allow your system to function. Let's go through it. Extensions. Just like you'd expect, these are the extensions that get tied to a physical phone. They can be used for just forwarding to cell phones, stuff like that. This is where you set up follow me settings, all of that kind of stuff. To do it, you hit the plus sign and just follow the data. You can make a single extension or a batch of extensions, which we will do later. Extension groups. This is where after you've made extensions, you can create a group and call it like sales. And then if you make a group, then when you're making a ring group or a call queue or something like that, you can use the group as your addition rather than figuring out exactly what extension you need to use. So that can come in handy later. Analog trunks. So this is where you create the pathing that allows an analog trunk to make it into your phone system and be answered by an IVR and stuff like that. But you start here. You would add a trunk, you tell it which ports you want to use. Both of them can be used. You give it a name. If the trunk has caller ID or not. And that's actually an important one. A lot of people don't think anything of it, but if your analog trunk does not provide caller ID and you have this box checked, your line won't work. And if your trunk has caller ID and you have this box unchecked, your trunk won't work. So caller ID and analog lines are important. Make sure you have that setting correct. It is the most common setting that I help people with. They say my analog trunk won't work. I say, is your caller ID setting right? Oh, that was it. So if you are outside of the US, make sure you have the correct caller ID scheme as well. Those are the 2 most common things that I hear people changing. You can change your outline selection to be ascending or descending, or even a pole. So ascending means it would use 1 first and then 2. If you're descending, you'll use 2 first and then 1. So if you have calls coming in using port 1 first and you want to leave that open, you can do that. Or if you have a certain trunk you want to use, or a certain line you want to use first, you can make it descending and put that first line in the last port. If you have like a 6208, you'll have 8 lines that you can do this with. So ascending, descending, stuff like that. The VoIP trunks, just like the analog trunks, can be made one at a time. The new firmware has the trunk group you can make, which allows you to create multiple usernames and passwords for a single provider. So some SIP providers allow you to have unlimited concurrent calls. Others make you have a trunk created with a username and password for each concurrent call that you want. If you have a provider like that, you can type that provider in here, and it automatically pops in the name of the place you're using. If you don't have one, you have to type it in manually. But whichever one you choose, it gives you the host name. But then you might end up with usernames and passwords and auth IDs for 5 different trunks. And it will use these in order, so you don't have to create 5 different setups for each trunk that you want to make. You just enter all 5 passwords, that's your 5 concurrent calls, and you can work off that. If you have a provider that uses unlimited concurrent calls, then you just add a regular SIP trunk. And we'll go over that later. SLA stands for Shared Line Appearance, and this is not something I'm going to go over with you. Shared Line Appearance allows for a group of phones to, how do you say it, have a more traditional look to your phone system. With analog lines in the past, every single line that came in would show up on all of the phones. And now with SIP trunking and with the IP phones, we use something called call park to replicate that. But it is still possible to use shared line appearance. You lose a ton of features on the system when you start using shared line appearance. So I'm not going to go over this. It is possible, and we can set it up. If you need help with it, you can give us a call. We're happy to assist people with that, but we don't recommend it. So outbound routes. Once you've created your trunks, you come in here and add an outbound route, and you can see there's no trunk, so it won't even let me make one. And essentially you make a rule that says which trunk to use for each type of dial that you make, a 3-digit dial, 7-digit, 10-digit, 11-digit, 800 numbers, international numbers. And we'll go through all of that later. But you have to have the trunks made, or you have to have the VoIP trunk or analog trunk made in order to have a route available for it. Inbound routes, same thing. I can't make any inbound routes because I don't know where the calls are coming from yet. I got to have a trunk that's going to receive the call in order to route that call to where it needs to go. So we'll go through those later. Call features. So this is where both the extensions and trunks and the call features are all part of creating that flow of information in and out to get calls where they need to go. The extensions and trunks are the roadways, so to speak, and the call features are the extras, the fine-tuning, the stuff that makes your system happier, makes you happier. It does the unique features. So let's go through those. Conference. You can create a conference room. You can create many conference rooms on this system, and they can handle as many as you have concurrent calls available. So if you're using analog lines, the only limit is the amount of analog lines that can call in from the outside. Internally, you could have your entire staff in a conference room with 3 people calling in from the outside and have a group conversation of 20 people. It'd be just fine. So we'll go through how to look at that later, how to go through that. Conference settings, different thresholds, All of that we will go through at another time, but conference rooms are built right into the system. There's a Google service that can be linked to that lets you schedule conferences and send them all out to all of your employees via Google, but we're not going to go through that either. Conference calls can be recorded, and they are listed in the last tab here under recordings. Video conference. This is a new feature. It's brand new with this beta firmware, and I have not gone through it yet, but I imagine it allows for the same type of setup as the conference room. Looks like you can schedule stuff too. Yeah. So I won't go through that right now. Know that it exists, video conferencing, and it can be hosted by your UCM. IVRs, interactive voice response. So another term for this, another word that people use is auto attendant. This is the automated system that answers your calls and says, your call is important to us. If you know your party's extension, dial it at any time. Press 1 for sales, 2 for tech support, 3 if you want to talk to our president. He's on his cell phone, so we'll forward you right there. You obviously didn't say that, but all those things are possible. You can create an IVR, you can give it any number you want, name it, what it can do. Can it call out to other extensions? Like, can it call out to my boss and reach his cell phone? Can they dial other extensions? Can they get to other IVRs and extensions if they just know the number? And I can allow that or not allow that. It's up to me. All those settings are in here. The key pressing events, where they go, how they're routed, are on the second tab here, and we'll go through all of that later, but the IVRs are right here. Voicemail. This is just the voicemail settings. So all voicemails will get sent to the email that's listed in the person's extensions. The setting for that, send voicemail to email, is a global setting here. This is for everybody on the whole system. Can it do it or can it not do it? And then keep the voicemail after emailing it. After it emails it, should I delete the email or keep it? By default, every voicemail gets sent to the email on file for that extension, and every voicemail is still kept on the phone after that email was sent. You can view the email template, change it to be whatever you want. But the one thing I want to note is that if you leave a message less than 3 seconds long, it just deletes it. It weeds out the hang-ups and stuff like that. That setting can be changed. I think 3 seconds is nice. It really weeds out a lot of unnecessary voicemails. So all of these settings can be adjusted. Max message per folder, sometimes I bump that up to like 200 because you get some people that just never delete their voicemails, and it gives them a lot of time before you have to go in and do it manually. So ring groups, these are groups that, I can't do any ring groups without extensions, that allow you to ring a group of phones, and if another call comes in, the call will ring in the background. It won't just not ring that phone. It'll still ring in the background if you're on a call, and then go to a destination of your choosing. The paging and intercomming, these are for groups, which I can't make right now because I don't have extensions. And you can also view the settings here, what the alert info header is, and those kind of settings. I won't go through what that means, but phones have to be told they're allowed to be paged to or intercom to. They won't do it by default. So there's other settings to change in that regard. Call queues, much like a ring group, a call queue will ring a group of people, and the difference is that when you have a call queue and you're on a call, the call will not ring in the background for you. The inbound route leaves you alone and rings everybody else in the queue except for the people that are on the phone. And then after you hang up your call, if that call is still in the queue, then your phone will start ringing after a brief cooldown. And you can program what that cooldown is. Queues can circle forever and ever, or they can have an exit option to go to voicemail, or they can have an exit option after you've gone through the queue 3 times, dump to an IVR, stuff like that. So queues and ring groups work very similar to each other, but they're not the same. Pickup groups is a whole other thing. By default, if you have a BLF of another person in your office, you can grab their call that's coming in directly to their phone by hitting their BLF key. Pickup groups allow you to fine-tune that. I'm not going to go over it right now, but that's the gist of what that can do. Dial by name. This is your dial by name directory. If you want to create custom directories, so like I could create a sales directory, and then I put in just the extensions that I want in that directory into the members here. And I can either query them by last name and then first name, or first name and last name. I can use a menu or by order where it just lists them off. So you'll have to play with these options, but you can create as many directories you want. You can create one with everyone in it or just a few departments, and then use those options in IVRs. For our dial by name directory for sales, or for our sales directory, press 1, and then it goes to this dial by name directory that you just created. So you can really customize that now, which is nice. Speed dials, this is an interesting feature. You can create any speed dial extension that you want, and you can number it. I'll make this one 55, and 55 is going to go to whatever I want. I want it to dial an external number, and if I dial 55 on a phone, it's now going to dial this phone number for me, so I don't even have to think about what the number is. So if you want to create 100 different speed dials for everyone on the system, you can create a quick cheat sheet, so to speak, of quick dial extensions, and that's what speed dial does. DISA is, I can't remember the acronym right now, but it's designed to let someone from the outside of the office call into a phone number so that they can turn around and call out as the business. So if you have people with cell phones that don't want to give out their cell phone numbers, this is one way to do that. They call in, they type in their code, and then they dial a number, and they can call out with the caller ID of the phone system rather than their cell phone. Typically nowadays we use soft phones to do that, and that works with this system as well, so we don't see a lot of this used anymore. Callback. This is new. This is new to this system, but it's been around for a while. The callback will hang up on a caller and then call them back, directing them to the selected extension when it's their turn in the queue, so to speak. So this is that setting that says, if you'd like to have our guys call you back when your spot is up, then you don't have to sit there on hold. That's callback. So you can build that in. I actually have not used it yet, but I'd be interested to try it. So we'll see how that goes. Event list. I don't know what this setting does. That's a new one for me. I have not had to use the event list for anything in my phone system creation, so we'll have to review that another time. Feature codes. These are the codes that allow for keystroke dialing. So if you want to park a call, you can press #72 if I have it enabled, rather than pressing the button for call park or something like that. Blind transfers can be done with #1 if you turn it on. Attended transfers with *2. Stuff like that. You can auto mix record, so you can turn on recording with *3 if it's enabled. In this case, all these are not enabled by default, but can be. And that's what feature codes do. Call park used to be in here as well, but that got moved. Common feature codes are like paging. If you want to listen, whisper, or barge on a call, so you can use that would be for training purposes, stuff like that. You want to hear what your employees are talking about with the customer, and don't want the customer to know that you're listening. That's listen. Whisper lets you talk to the person that you're training without the the customer hearing you, and barge allows you to completely take it over. By default, those three are off. You'd have to check this box to turn them on. But voicemail access is another feature code, *98 or *97 if you want to go directly into your own and bypass the password. And so that has to be enabled on the extensions as well, but that's a whole other thing. So lots of feature codes to deal with. Fax T38. So analog lines, T38 is the SIP high speed transfer. How do you say that? T38 is just the network way to do fax detection. You can create fax extensions. Essentially, it allows you to receive a fax and email it to the person listed here, whatever email address is listed. And that's all fax extensions do, is they allow you to point to an email address. If you have 6 fax extensions and each one's going to a different email address, every fax that comes in will be listed here. And will also get emailed to those fax extensions. In the fax settings, you can control the details of it. Faxing over internet usually works, but it is flaky. Faxing is an old technology that's been adapted to work with voice over IP, and it is not perfect. I have never seen a perfect faxing setup over internet, but some of them can get pretty close. The parking lot, that was in feature codes and got moved because now you can create multiple parking lots. It used to be just the one. You would transfer to 700 to get them into a parking slot, and it would go into the slots designated by that lot. Now you can add multiples. And then in here, I often will come in and use parking lots as extensions. If this is checked, it allows you to put a parking lot for 701, 702, 703, and so on and so forth as a BLF type of key. And if you want to park somebody, all you have to do is press the key rather than doing a transfer. And it allows it to throw it right into the slot. It works really slick. Emergency calls. When an emergency call is placed, it allows you to get a notification. So we'll call this one 911. And the emergency number is 911. We're going to call it significantly urgent. If this option is not enabled, then one. So that allows this allows the call to seize a line and immediately make a call out. So if all the lines are busy, it hangs somebody up and gives this person the line. The custom prompt is what you as an individual get told, which trunk it should use, and then if your extension's in here, you move that to the right, and every time 911 is called, you will receive whatever this custom prompt message is on your phone while that phone is calling 911. So you get a notification saying, Billy Bob in extension 206 just called 911. And that's the emergency calls notification. That's what this does. SCA, that is another tab that I have never used, and I'm not sure what that one means yet. So we will skip that one for now. On to the next section, PBX settings. So we've gotten through our first 2 main sections here, and that helps customize your system. The next 2 sections are technical sides of your system. This is the general stuff that tells your extensions what they're allowed to do, what your audio streams are allowed to do, what music you're using, where your recordings go, stuff like that. It's the background stuff that nobody really knows about. General settings. This is one of the reasons I actually did the upgrade to the beta software to show you this. Right now you have a global level caller ID number for all the outgoing calls. This is the caller ID that it would use if it had nothing else available. Typically these don't really do a lot anymore. They used to, but with the asterisk 13, it changed where it grabs caller ID from, and we'll go over that in another thing. It's in the DoD settings on the trunk, on the VoIP trunk. And so we'll go over that another time. The ring timeout. I usually change this. This I set to 20 to 30 seconds. So if you go 4 seconds per ring, 30 seconds is still like 7, 8 rings. It's a lot of rings. So sometimes I'll set that to 20. Usually I set it to 30. This is the ring timeout for any phone that's ringing that is not following another rule. So if you're going into a ring group, it'll follow the timer on the ring group. But if somebody just calls your extension, this is how long it's going to ring before it goes to voicemail. And 60 seconds is a long time. Now, in your extensions, you can change these on your own. You can set it for each extension individually, but it has to be less time than whatever your general setting is set to. So I usually set this to 30, and if I need it less, I set it individually on the extension. The part that is new is this right here, name of UCM. I can now name every one of my UCMs, and I go through a lot of them. And so knowing which one I'm working on helps, because I get on a screen like this and I look up here and I see, oh, I'm on a UCM 6202. I have 14 of those. Which one am I on? And then I have to try to connect my IP address with the correct unit to make sure I'm not making a change on the wrong system. So they added this, and I can call this Billy's Barbecue. So this particular unit will be used at Billy's Barbecue, and that'll help me understand that that's the system I'm on. If I save that and apply that change, this is the first setting I'm actually changing for you so you can see what it does. I'm going to watch right here. I'm going to refresh the screen. Once that's in place, my system is now labeled Billy's Barbecue. So I can always know exactly what system I'm on. Now we're in PBX settings, general settings, and I'm going to log out and we're going to pick back up here, but I wanted to show you this too. Even when I'm logged out and I'm at my admin screen, it tells me up here, I'm on Billy's Barbecue. So I know exactly what system I'm logging into, which helps me remember the password I need for that system and helps me make sure that I'm making the changes on the system that I want to be making changes on. So that's what that setting's for, and I really like it. The one thing I'm hoping they'll do is move that from here up to the tab on Chrome and Safari so that it's listed up here, and as I'm seeing 4 different tabs of systems, I can see Billy's Barbecue up here. I bet that'll be coming, but it's not here yet. So I'm going to get rid of Billy's Barbecue. And we'll keep going. Now, the last thing I changed on this page is the extension range. So right now, if you attempt to create an extension on the system, it is going to use these extension numbers for these particular groups. So ring groups will only be 6400 to 6499. Conference extensions will only be 6300 to 6399. So if you ever need to make an extension that isn't in this list, for example, if you wanted extension 500, you would have to check disable extension range, and that makes it so that you can pick any number you want for any of these. So if you're not familiar with the numbers that are used that are under 1,000, don't do this. But once you're familiar with all the different numbers the system uses, you can check this box and number anything any way you want. If you want to modify this range and still keep it restricted, you can leave this open but change these numbers here. And that just takes a little practice. So you got to understand what you're doing, what you want to have, what extension number before you start messing with this. In this case, I am going to disable the extension range because I like to create the numbers that I want. Every time you make a change and save, you can wait to apply changes, but that won't take effect until you finally hit apply changes. So you can stack multiple saves on top of each other and then apply them all at once at the end if you want. Continuing on, SIP settings. Most of these are pretty generic. You just leave them as default. If you want to change the port that your different things are connecting in on, the UDP port, for example, by default is 5060. That can be changed to 5070, 5080, anything you want. I don't ever use that one. Session timers are in here if you need to mess with those. TCP TLS, so this allows your extensions to connect on port 5060 still, but use a TCP packet rather than a UDP packet. For those of you that know what that is, this is where you turn that on. If you want to use encryption, so you can use TLS as well, you would check both of these. This requires a reboot if you apply that to your system. Does not stop the system from using UDP to register, but can be changed there. NAT. This is important. This is the one place you will need to change things if you want your SIP trunks to work right. When I'm going to use non-technical terms here. When the phone system talks to a SIP provider, the SIP provider is the person that gives you the internet-based phone system, the connection to the internet, to the phone world using the internet. So when the phone system talks to a SIP provider, the SIP provider needs to know, where do I respond to? Do I just, what's the IP address that you're coming from that I should always reply to? That's what this external host is. This can be a DNS address. It can be dynamic DNS. Most often it's the static IP address of your network, the WAN address. So the address that you get from your internet provider goes right here. And for me, that number is a quick way to find it, is to do a what's my IP from the browser. In this case, that won't work for me because my PC uses a different internet connection than my phone system is using. So I know what this address is. We'll wait and enter it later. On the flip side, if anything is local, so all of your phones that are connected to your local area network, all of your local networks that you're going to talk to go here. And you list them all right here. So then the system knows if I'm going through my LAN port, I'm going to not change the address. It's going to reply to my local address. But if I'm talking outside of the network and I'm going out to the external part of my world, then I'm going to tell it reply to this address. So it knows how to talk to the different devices that it connects to with the correct address. If you don't put anything in here and tell it to use address and STP, then the phone system talks to the SIP provider and tells it its local address. And then the SIP provider tries to respond to that local address and it can never make it back. So the calls won't establish, or they might establish, but you won't have any audio because it's not telling it the correct place to go back to. So this is an important setting. IX settings, these are used if you're using an IX trunk rather than a SIP trunk. I won't go through these, but the same type of stuff applies. All the settings are in there for it to modify that type of trunk. RTP settings. RTP is a fancy way of saying audio packets. So if you're sending information across the internet, your RTP is your audio streams. So the range start and end is 10,000 to 20,000. This can be whittled down. It can be 10,000 to 10,500. You need one of these ports open for every direction of audio. So one call uses 2 ports, one for inbound audio, one for outbound audio. I usually leave it default, and I just let it be. If I'm having trouble with people trying to hack in or things like that, I might whittle it down, or if I need the ports for something else, I'll whittle it down. But this is where you would change that on the system. As long as it's set 10,000 to 20,000, the phone system will assume that you have all 10,000 of those ports available for it to use on the firewall. And that's a setting you'll do at another time. Music on hold. This is something that's new as well. These disable enable buttons. Before the previous firmware, you used to be able to delete all of these. Some people don't like the sound of these, like the Robot Diddy one sounds like a fast-paced video game. So you might want to turn that one off. And this is the new part about it. You can now disable these. If you want your own music on hold, you have to create a new music on hold class. And that'll allow you to flip between them right here. And the ones you create, you can delete. But the default ones can't be deleted. They can only be disabled. The voice prompts. This is where you create your recordings for your IVRs and things like that. For the most part, you don't mess with your language prompts unless you want to change the language on your system. Custom prompt is where you can record one or upload a custom prompt, and you can even download them all to save them all for later. If you're recording a new one, you give it a name, you give it a format, either way is fine, and you pick an extension, and it will call that phone and let you record whatever it is you want to record. The upload option is also there, so if you've already have custom-made recordings, you can upload them using that. Call failure tone setting. This is the generic settings that are in place for all of the different responses that the system would receive and what it would play based on the response. So you can change those to be other things. I think you can even create new ones if you really want. Jitter buffer. The jitter buffer is a tool used if you are having like crackly sound, things like that, lag in your sound. So like you start talking but it comes out choppy. A jitter buffer puts a little timer in place that says, I want you to hold the information for like 100 extra milliseconds. Now this is milliseconds. This is a tiny amount of time, and you as a person probably wouldn't even notice it. But it lets it collect the information before it passes the audio streams onto you so that you don't get any choppiness. Usually you don't need to use this. Occasionally it is needed, and so it's in place here as the jitter buffer if you need it. Interface settings. This is your analog line settings. So if you are using analog lines, this is where you adjust the settings for that. When you put in FXO lines, that's the outside lines from your provider, you need to plug them in and do this detection here. This detects the power levels of those lines and lets them fill in automatically. Otherwise, you come in here and you can set the settings manually to what you believe they need to be or what the provider tells you they need to be. But if you hit detect, it'll figure it out for you and set those settings. And if you're having analog line troubles, this is one of the first things you should do, an ACIM detection. Recording storage. So you can add, like I said before, SD cards and USB drives to hold your recordings. The hard drive should be an NTFS. That's the recommended file system for these recordings. And if you have enable auto change enabled, then if you pop out the SD card, it'll record on the local storage. You pop the SD card back in, it's going to start recording on the SD card again. So it allows it to flip back and forth as you have devices available. NAS, this is a new thing that they've recently added, and it allows you to use, I believe, a network drive to save your recordings. And that's all I'll dive into with that one. I'll let you guys work on that one later. The next section, system settings. These are used very little. Once you set them up, they're pretty much set. You don't have to mess with them anymore. The HTTP server, that is if you have a certificate and want that warning to go away, you can do that kind of stuff in here. Network settings, this is where you set your static address. If you want the different modes that your system can be in, if you want to use it as a router, you would set it to route mode. If you want to use both LAN and WAN ports, or sometimes they're called LAN 1, LAN 2, you set it to dual, and it'll let you use both ports. I most often use switch. Plug it into my local area network and let my router route everything from there. If you use it as a router, It has static routes and port forwardings and all the other settings you can use. But like I said, for the most part, I just use it as a switch because I don't want my phone system to have to handle routing all of the internet traffic as well as trying to mitigate the phone call traffic as well, because the phone call traffic is so much more important to me than my network traffic. Being able to access the internet and whatnot. I want the phones to always, always, always work. OpenVPN is a feature that allows a phone to VPN in directly to the phone system and act as if it were locally there. So you don't have to have a VPN router or VPN server or anything like that. You could open VPN from the phone straight to the phone system, something like that. I've read a lot about it. I haven't actually set one up on OpenVPN. I use VPN a lot, but I haven't tried the new OpenVPN settings on the system. DDNS, dynamic DNS. So the system can mess with that external host setting in PBX-SIPNet using dynamic DNS built right into the system, so you can actively alter that address that it's sending to using these settings. If you don't activate it here, you can put the dynamic DNS address of your system right into that PBX-SIPNet setting, and that'll work as well. Security settings. This is an important one, especially if you're using SIP trunks. If you're using SIP trunks, I always, always, always recommend turning fail to ban on. Unless you have your SIP trunks so isolated on the firewall that only signals from the SIP provider can get through. Even then, I'd probably enable fail to ban just to keep sure that nothing was getting through that shouldn't be getting through. SSH access is on here as well. If you want to enable SSH, you have to turn it on. LDAP, so you can create a phone book that can be shared by all of your phones, and that is the LDAP server and LDAP phone book. So you can create any kinds of phone books that you want with any numbers that you want and push those to the phones via LDAP server. By default, all of the extensions are included in the base phone book. So all of those will show up no matter what. It's the extra numbers that you have to create phone books for. Time settings. This is actually got a few things that you need, especially if you're going to use time-based routing. The automatic date and time is turned on, and so it'll just grab whatever it's supposed to. But if it's not grabbing the right thing, you can set the time zone here. If you need to, you can manually set the date and time. You can tell it that the phone system will be the NTP server for the phones, meaning the time server. So all the phones will grab its time from here. If you don't check this, all of the phones will grab their time from the DHCP server. Office time. Once you program in office time, you pick your days, Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 is your office time, something like that. 17, say 16:59. So if that's your office time and I save it, then when I use the inbound route, when I make my inbound route, it'll ask me, what do I want to do during office time? Or what do I want to do outside of office time? This is what it's going to reference. Whatever you have in here for office time is what it will use. The holiday is the same thing. Whatever I type in for holidays, so I can say on a holiday, go to this different route. We'll use Christmas, December 25th. And these are not in order Sunday to Saturday. They are in order by number, so the order in which they are here has no relevance on the day of the week. December 25th is my holiday for Christmas, so then when my inbound route says during holidays go this other route, it'll reference this holiday, and on that day every year it's going to route it differently. And so we will show you how to do that in the inbound and outbound or inbound routes later on. Email settings. This is important as well. By default, the system can act as an email server, but it will often get flagged as spam. So if you leave these settings like this, they may or may not work. I recommend flipping it to client and getting a Gmail address or any kind of email address that you want. The server for it, for example, Gmail is smtp.gmail.com:465. You need that port number in there because there's no other place to put it. And that will send to that server on that port. Username and password. And you can use a POP server if you want. I recommend the SMTP server. These two settings down here can be whatever you want. We'll say voicemail. And it will be voicemail at mydomain.com. And that is what they will appear to come from. But whatever the username and password up here is set to is where the email will actually come from. Once you get all these settings in, you save it, apply it, and do a test. The test lets you type in an email address and send a test email to it to see if these settings are working. If they are, you can flip here to the email send log and see what happens. You're looking for a 250 code where it says sent successfully. If you get any other code, you troubleshoot from there. Maintenance. User management. This is where you create new users. I've said previously, if you want access to upgrade, backup, and the system cleaner, you must be logged in as the admin. You can only have one admin, and he has super administrator privileges. No other user has it. Do not lose the password for admin. If you lose the password for admin and do not have your email settings set up, you have no way to reset that password. And you will need to factory reset and start building from scratch. Not fun. So always make sure you hang on to this admin password, never lose it, and always make sure your email settings are working so you can reset the password should you need to. If you do that, everything else is usually pretty straightforward. You can use backups and restores. If you want another user, the best you can do is an administrator, not a super administrator. You can create other permission levels with other rights. So if I want to give somebody access to just the conference rooms, I can make a conference user and give them only access to that. And you can create all that kind of stuff in this section. So admin, don't lose it. Change information, this is where you change your password and the email, the reset email for that password. So if your email settings are working, whatever email address you put in here is what will be sent to for resetting the password. Operation log shows us everything that's happened. I messed with time settings, I deleted a time condition, I applied changes. It tells me everything that I've done on this system, what IP address of the computer that did it, what user was logged in at the time. It tells me everything. And this can't be changed or altered, but they can be deleted. There we go. The last thing that happened was the admin deleted the operation log. Syslog is used for troubleshooting. System events, I always come in here and I go to the alert event list. I highlight everything and turn all those alerts on. Now I don't turn on all the emails, and I don't turn on the HTTP notification unless you really want it. So by turning all of these on, whenever I do any of these actions, log in, log out, it will log it in this alert log. If they're not in the event list, it will not show up here. So if I log out and I type in the wrong password, I go, oh darn it, wrong password. And I type in the right password. And I go back down here to those system events, it will log that information. I didn't apply my changes. There's your lesson on applying changes. If you don't apply your changes, what you just changed will not save. Wrong password, right password. And you can see user login failed from that address. Tried to log in as admin, and this one succeeded. So it really logs all that. So if somebody's trying to hack into your system and you have these alerts on, then you'll be able to see it. You'll be able to see the IP address that it came from and who's messing with you. Upgrading, this is where you upgrade the software on your system. If you're going to upgrade the software, do a backup first. This is where you do a backup. You can create a scheduled backup that happens on a time frame. To do that, you have to enable it and set your conditions. You can use a TFTP server, or you can use the SD card. Whatever you want to use, but use something. Create regular backups. It's important. System cleanup allows you to clean up recording files and voice logs and operation logs and all that kind of stuff automatically if you want to. If you have a ton of storage, it's not a big deal. If you don't, use the cleaner. The cleaner is the one that lets you clean stuff out. And you can choose to just use USB cleaner and SD card cleaners. So this is helpful if you have limited space. If you don't have limited space, it's not a big deal. Troubleshooting. This is where you do a packet capture. So if you're having trouble and you need somebody like me to help you troubleshoot, you come here to your Ethernet capture, make sure it's on the LAN port, because that's where your calls are flowing through. You hit start, and as soon as the stop light comes up, you make your call. You do your test, it fails, you hang it all up, you hit stop, and then you download. And this is the file that you send me. And I can look at that file and see what's happening. Grandstream can look at that file as well. So this is a quick, easy way to get a failed call information to the people that can help you troubleshoot it. Network troubleshooting. Signal troubleshooting, just like network troubleshooting, except for analog lines. Service check. So sometimes your system might not be detecting, how do you say that? If your system isn't responding to the SIP packets correctly, this is like a check. Check cycle is every 60 seconds. If it fails 3 times in a row, it restarts the SIP service. So it lets you restart that SIP service without having to reboot your phone system. So if you're noticing that your SIP options aren't responding correctly, often you turn on this service and it will start checking itself every now and again. One side note is if you turn this service on, make sure you whitelist your own IP address, your 127.0.0.1 yourself, so to speak, in your security settings. Make sure you whitelist yourself, otherwise you can potentially ban yourself. It's kind of funny. All right. CDR, call detail records. This is where your calls sit. This is where you get to see what calls have been made, that sort of thing. CDR is the first tab. Every call that gets made gets listed here. Since we haven't created any, there's nothing to look at. But it'll tell you where the call came from, where it went to, what trunk it used, what time it started, what the actual call time is versus talk time. So if you had 10 seconds of ringing versus, so like if they had a 30-second call with 10 seconds of ringing, you'd have a call time of 40 seconds, but a talk time of 30 seconds. And then at the end here, you even have all your recording files if you're recording those calls. Statistics I haven't looked at too much, but it tells you in a graph format your inbound calls, outbound calls, all that kind of stuff, so you can see how many calls you're making, who's making them. Yeah, the statistics, you get the idea. Even though you can grab your recording files here with each log, if you want to see them all at once, you can come here and they can be sorted by date, time, caller, callee, size, and you can download them from here. API configuration. So if you're going to use something that might integrate with a phone system, like a property management system, this is part of that API configuration. The value-added features are the extras. This is the stuff that doesn't really have a home in any of those other sections, but has value to us. They're usually unique settings. Most people don't use many of them, but we're going to go through it. Zero config is the one that you would use most commonly. Zero config is the provisioning system so that you can immediately set up an extension without having to log into the phone itself. So the IP address of the phone would show up here. You'd be able to hit edit and assign the extension and just tell it to push it to that phone. All of the other stuff here, the global policy, global templates, model update, and the settings itself, all of those allow you to manipulate what settings you want to change on all the phones. And there's lots of ways to do it. I'm not going to go through it right now, but this is essentially the provisioning system built in to Grandstream. AMI. I honestly don't know what that one stands for yet. CTI server, CRM. This is a contact management program that might integrate. Sugar, CMM, vTiger, these are Salesforce, Zoho. These are all the pre-configured ones that you can do. PMS, that's Property Management System. Wake up service, so it's think of it like an alarm. This is what a hotel might use to wake up their customers sitting in the room that want to be woken up in the morning by the phone call. So that's the wake up service. Fax sending, you can send faxes right from the system. You just type in the number and attach your file and then hit send, and it'll show you down here what it's trying to do. You have to have all your routes and stuff in place, and it should tell you if it sent it or failed. But this is just for fax sending. Every individual user interface has this as well. So you don't have to give them admin access to send a fax. They can log into their personal user if they want to. The announcement center, you can create announcements like our building is on fire, please vacate the premises. And you can send that to a group of phones that's predetermined, and you can create key codes to do that. So you might type *21 for the 21 announcement, and then *21 555, where 555 is the group that you're sending to. And you can quickly dial it into your phone, hit dial, and it will automatically send that message out to all of the phones to let everybody know what's going on. So emergency announcements can be done this way, stuff like that. WebRTC is a whole nother thing. I'm not even going to try to explain it, but it is starting to be built into the backbone of phone services and web interfaces and good stuff. So that is the overview of the entire system, what it can do, what each section is used for, and that wraps it up. We will go through how to program everything in the next section. All right, we are going to look at the Grandstream UCM configuration. This is for the 6100, 6200, or 6510 series. Doesn't matter which one you're trying to make, the software is the same. So we start by logging in. Right now everything's default, so admin, admin. If it's not admin, admin, look at the bottom of your device, and there could be a password sticker to the bottom. That is for extra security so that people can leave it default. I've already done an overview that explains what each one of these sections does and means to help you understand what you're looking for and where to find it. If you need that overview, go ahead and click on the link provided, and you can go through that when you have time, or you can pause this video and go do it now. To get started, we're going to look at our diagram. The diagram shows all of the phone numbers we want to set up, what we want them to point to, and how each of those settings creates more options and more options all the way to the end of ending at an extension or a voicemail or an outside phone number. We don't start by creating the inbound routes for these. We start by creating all of the things that the routes can point to. So in this process, we're going to go through, and starting here, we're going to start with our route diagram first, which you can see behind me here. And then we're going to start setting up extensions and voicemails and follow me settings, and then ring groups and IVRs, and then the trunks and the routes. So we kind of work backwards from the end back to the beginning so we can make our inbound routes. So the first thing we're going to do is create extensions. How to create extensions. You click on extensions in trunk, and then you go to the subcategory extensions. From here, you can click the plus sign and add either a bulk extensions or a single extensions. We're going to do bulk, so we're going to click on batch here, which is the method, and what kind of extension we're using SIP. So for the most part, you'll always make a SIP extension. If you need to connect like a fax machine or an analog device, you would make an FXS extension. IAX is another type of extension that we don't use here very often, so I'm not going to go through that. How many extensions do we want to create? In this case, I am going to make 101. Oh, I can only make 100. And based on our diagram, we're going to go 1200 to 1300 for our extension numbers. We'll start at 1201, and I'm going to go 100 extensions. That'll get me to 1300. Extension incrementation is 1, which means you get 1201, 1202. You can jump by 2s or 3s or 4s or even 5s if you want to leave gaps between, or you can make them one at a time. Permission level, everybody's going to have permission to call out 10-digit numbers or 11-digit numbers, but not internationally. So we're going to give everybody national rights. All of these extensions are not going to have voicemail, so I'm going to disable voicemail. But I want Keep Alives turned on, so I'm going to check that box. Keep Alives makes sure the extension and the phone are talking to each other regularly. If you were making a lot of virtual extensions, you wouldn't turn that on. But I find this helps keep BLF lights active and keep registration constant. Prevents drops, things like that. You can change caller ID number. You can set a SIP password. If you hover over, though, you'll see that R means random. So it's going to create a random password for everybody, and that's what we want. Then E here means use the extension as the caller ID number. Now there will be another place we'll do caller ID, so leave that alone. So this is it. That's all you really need to set, and you can just hit save, and it will create all 100 extensions. You can go through and modify, codecs and faxing stuff and other settings that we're not going to mess with. Unconditional call forwards. You can do all that right from the get-go here in the batch creation, but you don't need to. You can customize that individually as you need to. So I'm going to hit save here. It tells me what it's going to create, and we're going to let it create it. Now 100 extensions is quite a bit, so it takes a moment to create them all, and voila. Now I said 1200, so we're going to create one more. And it's going to be a single extension, and it's going to be 1200. It's going to have national rights. Only this one's going to have voicemail. And you can see here it even shows you the SIP password when you're only making one. And it shows you the voicemail password because you're only making one. We'll set this to 2018, the current year. We're going to skip voicemail password verification because whenever this phone checks its own voicemail, I don't want it to have to punch in its password. We trust everybody on the site, so we're going to do that. If you don't check this box because then they have to type in the password every time. I still want my Keep Alives turned on. And you can tell here we have a few more options of settings available to us when we're making just one extension at a time. The auth ID is often identical to the extension number. That's the SIP user ID. If you want a different auth ID than SIP user ID, you can type that in here. And you can use two different numbers, so to speak, or even letters. But if you leave it blank, the auth ID is the same as the extension number. That's new. We'll look at that right now. All right, emergency calls caller ID. So when you call out, if you want to change the number that it uses as caller ID for emergency calls, you can put that in here. If you don't want the extension active, you can disable it here. We can punch in names. We'll start with mine. And my email address. Oh, I want to do the autofill. There's my email. Send me an email. The user password is for logging in as yourself. Right now we're logged into the admin portal, or to the UCM's portal using the admin login. If we logged in as 1200, we'd use this password here. After you click save here, this password disappears, and the only way to change it is to completely replace it. You can never actually find out what that password is. If you have more than one extension that you want to, more than one physical phone or soft phone that you want to connect to this extension, you'll want to change the concurrent registrations to be a higher number than one. Right now, only one device can register as this extension. So we'll go ahead and save that one. And boom, we have 1200 and then 1201 all the way through 4 whole pages of all of the numbers. The greatest per page you can get to is 40. And you can flip through page 2 and page 3 all the way up to our 1300 mark. 101 extensions. If you register them, they will show up here as registered rather than unavailable, but we won't mess with that right now. Now, these extensions are in here, but I can't use them until I hit apply changes. So we're going to apply those changes and make all of those available. Now, what about follow me settings? What does that mean? We looked at on our diagram here. Different extensions use different things, and sometimes we can have an extension ring and then follow me to a cell phone. So it rings the extension, it rings the cell phone, and I thought I had written one in here. I didn't write one in here, but I did put it on this diagram. Extensions, voicemails, and follow me settings. So if we were sending a call directly to an extension, then the follow me setting would follow that phone if it didn't ring to its cell phone destination, and then if you didn't answer on the cell phone, it would come back and leave a voicemail on the system. So we're going to start by looking at extension 1200, and we're going to edit it. And at the top here, you see we have more tabs now. And you can see all of the passwords are grayed out, so you can't just see them. But the voicemail and the SIP password you can see if you need to. But this one down here, there's no seeing it. You'll never get to know what that is again unless you just reset it. Now, if you have this extension, it's active and it's got voicemail enabled, you can go all the way to the last tab to follow me settings, and you can turn that on. So that means that this phone extension will now ring the regular extension at the phone for the allotted amount of time. If there is no answer on that phone, it will jump to the following numbers that we list down here. And it will ring that extension, that cell phone or landline, whatever you want to forward it to, another desk phone. Upon ringing, if you have this box checked here, confirm when answering, the person that picks up the call will hear, you have a call being forwarded from your extension from whatever number. And it will ask you to accept this call, press 1. Deny this call, press 2. I'm not sure if 1 and 2 are the right options, but it asks you to confirm it. And as long as you have that confirm when answering on, the system will send it back to its voicemail or to this default destination if nobody picks up and confirms the call. If you uncheck this and you're sending it to a cell phone and the cell phone doesn't pick up and answer, it'll go to the voicemail, and they will get the voicemail of the cell phone. If you check this, it doesn't go to the voicemail of the cell phone, it comes back to this default destination. All right, what do you want them to hear when they're waiting for the call? You can create a custom music on hold, like your call is being forwarded and we're looking for the person, and that's all fine. Or you can just give them a ring. And that's what that does. Skip trunk authorization. If you have a trunk that requires authorization to use, like a password, you can tell it to skip that by checking this box. Otherwise, you'll need to get that password in there. For what we're doing, we're not using passwords, so we'll ignore that. Use the callee's DOD for following. DOD is direct outward dialing. This is the caller ID that the extension gets. So if I assign an extension to 1200 and check this box, it's going to use the caller ID I've assigned to 1200 when it forwards that call on. If I don't, it'll pass the caller ID of the original caller through to the cell phone. Enable destination, we're going to go to the voicemail of 1200. So it's going to try to ring through, it's going to demand the confirmation when answering, and if it doesn't get it, it's going to end at the voicemail of this. So the first following number will be an external number. We'll do 4321. That's my external number. It's going to ring it for 30 seconds and then end at the default destination. If I want, I have to add that. If I want, I can add another one. 888-555-5432. It's going to ring that one for 30 seconds. And it'll go as long as you want it to go and then dump back to the voicemail. We'll just do the one. And that's how Follow Me works. Once that is in place, anytime extension 1200 is called directly, it will obey that rule. And if it's in a ring group, it'll ignore it. It's only directly dialed calls that honor the Follow Me setting. So that's how you set up extensions and set up voicemail and set up Follow Me. Again, voicemail is just this button right here. Remote voicemail is another option. That's if you want another system to handle voicemail settings, which we're not going to mess with today. Once you have extensions and voicemails and your Follow Me settings set up, we move on to the next section of ring groups. How to set up a ring group. All right, ring groups, you go into Call Features and Ring Groups. A ring group allows a set of phones to ring, either simultaneously or in order, have music on hold or ringing in the background, and then dumps to a destination of your choosing. We're going to call this ring group 1. By default, it picks in the extension range of 6400s, so we're going to leave that. We're going to tell it that, well, let's look at our diagram here. Ring group 1 is going to ring 1200 to 1210 and then go to voicemail. So 1200, hold down Shift. Oh, it didn't work. I got to check them individually. Now, if you had another Grandstream phone connected with a peered trunk, the extensions of the other system would show up on here too, and you could put those in that ring group, and you could ring across systems. That's all possible. The ring strategy, you can ring in order. Most commonly, I ring simultaneously. Everything rings together. Music on hold. This is what the person calling in will hear while the phones are ringing. Now, the thing to make note here is that the phone system answers the call the moment it starts playing this. So if you have something that requires you to not answer the call because you don't want to charge them a toll charge or something like that, don't set this to anything. Leave it the way it is. If you're using SIP trunks and the amount of calls doesn't matter, I usually set this to default ringback tone. This lets them hear ringing back as soon as the phones start ringing. And it warns you if music on hold is not set to none, an inbound route via an analog trunk may incur costs because that inbound trunk answers it the moment it starts playing the ringback. Custom prompt, oh I forget, ring to announce to a caller. I forget which one it announces to. It's a message to the caller, which is the person calling in, I believe. And lets them know what's going on. I rarely use it. There are some custom reasons to use it. We're not going to go over it here. Ring timeout. This is usually about 20 seconds. 4 or 5 rings. Sometimes it's 30 seconds. You can set this to auto record. It will record every call then that passes through this ring group. This is new. Toggle support for calling configured. Interesting. We won't worry about that for now. Replace display name. If you check this box, the caller ID name that appears on your phone will be replaced with this name up here. If you need that, that's helpful sometimes. And then at the end, after all is said and done, it rings all of those phones simultaneously, playing a ringback tone for 20 seconds. And if nobody picks up, you go to voicemail is what we decided, of 1200. And voila, we have ourselves a ring group. We're going to make a second ring group. I'm going to go a little faster on this one. Ring group 2, 1250 to 1260, and ends at IVR 1. But I haven't created IVRs yet. So what do I do? Ring group 2, 1250 to 60. One, two, three, 9, put all those in there, and 60. We're going to ring simultaneously. We're going to do ring back. We're going to go do it for 20 seconds, and we're ending at an IVR, but I don't have that IVR made yet, so I can't put that in here, which means I'm going to have to come back to this. And this is where our diagram helps us out, because it reminds us to do so much stuff. So after I've created my IVRs, I'm going to come back here and change the destination to have that IVR as one of the options. Now, I could have made my IVRs first, but my IVRs also point to ring groups. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You have to pick which one you do first. Either way, you've got to go back and change something. Oh, wrong one. What else do we have to make? Ring groups, queues, IVRs, and then double check everything. All right, so let's go to queues next. How to create a call queue. First, you go to call features, call queue, and you hit add. Much like the ring groups, they have a lot of similar settings, but the ability to leave them and hear the ringing in the background and things like that are different. The extension numbers go to 6500. We're going to call it Q1. The strategy is ring all. We can choose linear, least recent, fewest calls, random, round robin. Lots of options for a call queue. Music on hold is going to be ring back tone. If we wanted, we could put, your call is important to us. Please remain on the line, and the next available operator will be with you shortly. And play music or something. We can create any kind of music on hold sequence we want. Just ringing is fine too. Max queue length. Configure the maximum number of calls to be queued at once. This number does not include calls that have been connected with agents, only calls that are still in the queue. Now it's set to 0 right now, which means unlimited, and that's the default. Wrap up time. This is the amount of time that a person that has answered a call has before the phone call starts ringing again. So if you want to have no delay between when you hang up a call and when you receive your next one, you set this to 0. 10 seconds is the person hangs up the phone, they have 10 seconds to jot stuff down before their phone starts ringing again. Ring time. Each agent will ring this amount of time. If you have it set to like linear or any of these others, that timer is important. If you have it set to ring all, not so important. Retry time. The number of seconds to wait before ringing the next agent. So there will be a gap in between when the first one stops ringing and the next one starts ringing when you have a different ring order, like linear, and that's the amount of time between. Auto record records all calls that go through this call queue. Max wait time. The time represents the absolute amount of time to allow a caller to stay in a queue before no one answers the call. And so 60 seconds, it would ring constantly for 60 seconds and then go to this destination. So this is where we would change where the exit is on that queue. So for Q1, we decided it's going to ring 12:20 to 12:30, have an option for a voicemail out, but repeat forever. Let's see if it'll let us do that. So 0 typically is the wait forever option. And still lets me choose an out, so we're going to set it to voicemail. Destination prompt. Configure the voice prompt cycle in this queue while playing the voice prompt. And you can press 1 to transfer to a failover destination. So this is your out. This is your voicemail out. We set our max wait time to 0, which means this should ring endlessly, even though I have an exit strategy there. If I enable this, every 20 seconds, I want you to play this special custom prompt that I create. And I would create the prompt in prompts, which is here, which we can show you where that is later. And the exit is voicemail of 1200. And that's what happens when they press 1. And so if you want to get out, the prompt is going to say, your call is important to us, and remain on the line. So you might pair these together sometimes, so that music on hold up here, you might set to just music, and then every 20 seconds you play the special prompt that says, your call is important to us, please stay on the line, press 1 if you want to leave a voicemail. And that's a ring group. Oh, I didn't add the agents. So the agents are on the last settings here. There's a bunch of advanced settings we can mess with. I'm not going to go through those right now. But the agents are added over here. And this is 12:20 to 12:30. And those people are permanently in that queue. There's ways to set up dynamic agents as well, so they can log into the queue and out of the queue. We're not going to talk about any of that today. The second queue that we're going to make is 12:40 to 12:49. No way out unless no agents are present. Let's see what that looks like. So we're going to ring all. Q2. We're going to set Q length to 0. Endlessly. And agents are 12:40 to 12:49. Let's do that. That's right. Okay. That should put all the way down to 49. And here's one of the advanced settings. Leave when empty. Configured when the caller has been disconnected from the queue if the queue has no agents anymore. And the failover destination will be the other queue in this case. So strict. Yes, callers will be disconnected from the queue if agents are paused or invalid. So we're going to set this to yes. So you're going to leave if it's empty and you're going to go to queue 1. Dial an empty queue? No. Callers cannot, so the caller can't even enter this queue if there's no agents logged into it. So if we had this set to dynamic agents and there were no agents in here logged in, it would hit this queue and go, nope, can't do it, and go to queue number 1 instead. Okay, we apply those changes, and now those queues have become available to use. And the next step is creating IVRs. How to create an IVR? Start by going to Call Features, and you click on IVR. Add IVR, and we're going to look at our diagram. We want an IVR with these options. And then we want a second IVR with these options. Now we've already created our call queues. I haven't created IVR number 2 yet. Call queue 2, outside number, voicemail. So in this case, I'm going to create IVR 2 before I create IVR 1. So if I want them to be numerically right, I need to see that. So my first IVR is going to be IVR 1, which is 7,000. So I'm going to make IVR 2 and use 7001 just because I want IVR 1 to be the first number and IVR 2 to be the second number. I'm going to allow I'm going to allow this IVR to be able to call out because I need it to go to an external number. So it needs to have national rights. This is for the IVR to be able to make an outbound call. When somebody calls in, if I want them to be able to dial any extension number without having to be told about it, I keep this checked. If I don't want him to be able to do that, I uncheck that. I don't mind. I want him to be able to reach anyone he wants if he knows the extension number without being told. There's a blacklist, whitelist, stuff like that you can mess with. You can also replace the display name of your caller ID with the IVR name if you so need. Alert info, that is if you're going to change a ringtone, something like that, based on which IVR it goes through. The prompt is the recording that is heard. You've reached blah, blah, blah company, press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for this, 4 for that, and that's the prompt that you have to record. Right now it's just going to say welcome, and that's all you get. Response timeout is how long, oh, I missed one, the digit timeout is how long between digits do we wait for you to hit another digit. So if you start typing in 134, but wait 3 seconds between the 1 and the 3, it's going to send it to number 1. So you have to type quickly within 3 seconds between digits if you want to continue typing in an extension. If you press 1 and wait 3 seconds, it's going to go to option number 1. The response timeout is how long after the IVR finishes playing do I do my next step. And we have it set to 10 seconds. So after the last recording is done, they have 10 seconds to decide something, or it's going to go to one of these repeat options. Right now we have the system told to repeat it 3 times if they don't press anything or if they press something wrong. If they do that 3 times, this is the recording that gets played to them before it does the next step. The next step is on the next page. So after 3 times of not pressing something or pressing something wrong, it's going to say goodbye and hang up on them. And we can change that. We can make it go to a voicemail. We can make it go to a queue. We can make it do whatever we want. I'm going to leave them as default. As far as our options, we want 1 to go to ring group 2, 2 to go to an IVR, ring group 2, 2 to go to an IVR. Oh, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. This is IVR 2. We're over here. 1's going to go to a cell phone. 2 is going to go to an extension with follow me. Let's fix that. 1 is going to go to an outside number, like a cell phone. So 2 is going to go to an extension with follow me, which is my extension, which we created earlier. 3 is going to go straight to voicemail, and 4 is going to go to ring group 2. And we're going to create the recording that allows that to be said. Thank you for calling. Press 1 for Bill, 2 to find Lucas, 3 to leave a message, and 4 for sales. Something like that. Save that. Now that we have IVR2 created, we can create IVR1, which can also dial trunks, or dial the trunk, and can reach other extensions, has national rights, all the same settings down here, key pressing events, ring group 2, IVR2, call Q2, and you can really build these any way you want. And then outside number and voicemail. And you can build them in layers. You can layer IVR on IVR on IVR and have lots and lots of menus, or have no menus at all. It's completely up to you. And apply those changes. Now if we go back to our original diagram, set up ring groups, queues, IVRs, and then double check the destinations of everything. Because IVRs were created last, queues second, ring groups third. If I had any ring groups pointing to the other things, I have to go back and fix them. To look at that, I have ring groups that point to extensions and end at IVR number 1. That was ring group 2, actually, that does that. So we're going to go back and look at our ring groups, and ring group 2 is supposed to end. Now that I have it created, I can send it to IVR 2. Was it 2? IVR 1. And save. And this one was going to voicemail. We can double check that if we need to, yeah. And then apply that change. So once you've gone through and double checked everything to make sure that all of the stuff that's supposed to be pointing to each other is pointing where it needs to be, now we can go back and make the inbound routes that point to these things that we've just created. So to make an inbound route, if we go there, we have to understand how to make an inbound route. And to make an inbound route, we need a trunk, because if I try to add it, it's going to tell me you don't have any trunks. So we need to make a trunk for it to connect to. There are 2 types of trunks you can make that we use commonly. One is an analog trunk. This is if you're using an actual analog telephone line to reach your phone system. This technology is going away, but it still works. It's still fine. You select how many lines you have coming in. You give it a name. We call it Ana 1. And the only real thing you need to double check on this, in the US, you want to double check your caller ID. If your trunk has caller, if your lines have caller ID, you make sure this is checked. If your lines don't have caller ID, you make sure it's unchecked. Otherwise it won't work. And the other thing is the caller ID scheme. Belcore, Telcordia is the default one for the US, and your tone country, I'm set to US. So if you're in another country, you may need to change this, and you may need to change this. For those of us in the US that use caller ID on all of our lines, everything default should work. You just check the lines you want to use and hit save. For VoIP trunks, this is where it gets a little trickier. The trunk group can be used to add VoIP trunks that allow for only 1 concurrent call per channel, and you can add multiple channels to a single trunk, so you don't have to create 5 different inbound routes and 5 different failover routes on outbound routes. You just create one trunk group and use it as one trunk. I'm not going to make this today, but you can add multiple user IDs, as many as you need for each trunk you want to enter for a single host. It's kind of cool. I haven't used it yet. It's a new feature, but from what I've heard, it works just fine. We're going to add a regular SIP trunk here, and the SIP trunk settings for each provider may be different. The one I'm going to show you is a company we like to use called Next Vortex. Props to you, Next Vortex. You do a great job. We really appreciate you. So let's look at that. We're going to call this trunk PX1. Now, what we use is 2 concurrent trunks, 2 side-by-side trunks that have unlimited concurrent calls as failover. So we're going to create both trunks just to show you what that looks like so that you can see it. And this is information you will get from your provider. I know my provider's host name. Each one is going to be different. And these settings here are up to you. Now, NAT is typically left off now. You don't check that unless you have a specific reason to. Keep original caller ID. That's if you want to retain the original caller's caller ID when passing a call through out to somebody else. And I like to do that. Keep trunk caller ID. That means no matter what call goes out, it's going to change it to the DOD, to the caller ID number that's assigned to the trunk. I don't do that. I want the original caller ID kept if possible. Caller ID and caller ID name. These are only typed in if you need to. Oh, I didn't change my trunk. I'm going to back up here at the top. What kind of trunk what type do you need to create? You have a peered trunk or a registered trunk. A peered trunk requires no credentials. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. For these trunks that we're going to create today, we're going to do the registered trunk with credentials. It adds a few more lines and gives me a username, password, and auth ID. Still the same provider name, still the same host name, still the same options here. But once you get down to here, you decide if your trunk needs registration or not. I usually check it. I don't have to, but I choose to. And I also check this, allow outgoing calls if registration fails. Even if the registration isn't working right, I don't care. I want it to still try to send the call with the credentials. And it will. So regardless if the receiving end is giving me confirmation that I'm registered, it's still going to keep sending calls. And for this service, it works great. Again, caller ID, name, and number I'm not going to mess with. Username, I have off to the side here. I'll paste it in. And the auth ID is the same as the username. The password, you don't get to know. It goes right there. The auth trunk, this is an optional setting based on your SIP provider. If they need, the UCM will send a 401 response to incoming calls to authenticate the trunk. Not every SIP provider needs it, but some of them do. And you've got to figure that out for yourself. Auto record, this is the most common way I record things. I make a trunk and I click auto record. Every single call passing through this trunk gets recorded. And there's another setting I changed elsewhere that announces to everybody that calls may be recorded. Direct callback, this is a new feature. I haven't tested it yet, but I'm excited to try. It allows external numbers the option to get directed to the extension that last called them. So if I called you from extension 203, you call back in, it will redirect you, give you the option at least to reach that person that just called you based on your caller ID. So kind of neat. I'm excited to try it. It's a very new feature on this system, so that'll be really neat. I'd like to point out at the top, there are no extra tabs here when you're creating a trunk. So after you save it, it's warning me here that this is not an IP address, it's a DNS name, so that's okay. After you create your trunk, you go back in to edit it, and now we've got our advanced tab. I go to the Advanced tab and I check this box, Enable Heartbeat Detection. There's some more settings here you can mess with if you want. I don't mess with them by default just to get calls coming in and going out. The trunk itself can detect faxes if you want and direct wherever you want it to go, things like that. The maximum number of calls per line. If this trunk was a limited trunk and it could only do 2 calls at a time or 1 call at a time, you change this number. We're unlimited, so I leave it at 0. All right, I'm going to do that exact same thing with my second trunk, but a little bit faster. So this is the secondary trunk they use for failover. Original caller ID, need registration, save, go back in, advanced, enable heartbeat detection. This helps me monitor the trunk on the dashboard better. So as soon as I apply this, these settings are going to try to register to my provider. But my provider won't know how to get back to me. It needs to know who to reply to. Who do I tell that I've got the registration? The signaling that it gets will tell it my local address here. And I don't need it to know that. I need it to know my public address. So we're going to go into PBX settings, SIP settings, and the NAT tab. In time past, we used to check that NAT setting on the trunk, and that would help send this external host address. Now they have this special checkbox here, use IP in SDP, and you check it. And that says send whatever number I put in here, or a dynamic DNS address, or whatever I put in here, I want to send with my packets to say, hey, this is where you reply to when contacting me. Number is hopefully blurred out, but if not, it's fine. This is our test system, so it changes frequently. Now my local network is here. Now, I have phones across my 10, 11, 12, I have all across the system. So I'm going to type in 172.30.0.0/16. And that covers anything in the 172.30 subnet is considered local to me. So it doesn't need to tell anything that's coming from here about this address. And anything that's going outside doesn't need to know about these addresses. And that's kind of how it separates it for us and tells the right entities the right information. Now this setting is going to require me to reboot the system. But I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to apply my changes first so I don't lose my other settings. And then it's going to prompt for a reboot again. And upon coming back up, my trunks should register. So I'm going to pause and we'll be right back. All right, reboot is done. We're going to log back in here. And it's going to take us right to that dashboard. And you can see the trunks we've made. The analog line tells me there's nothing available because there's nothing plugged into those. You can see PX1 and PX5 went blue. You can hover over that and see registered and registered. This means that I've got my firewall settings right and I've got my NAT settings right that we just changed. The firewall settings are something completely different. You've got to have the access from the outside world in through your firewall and point traffic on your SIP port, which by default is 5060, and your RTP streams, which is by default are 10,000 to 20,000, and have those forwarded straight to your phone system. And if that's not in place, your trunks will not register. That'll be shown in a separate video. Now that we've got our trunks made, we can move on to the next step. That step is inbound routes. So let's look at this one. So we've created our trunks. Now we can do our outbound and inbound routes. And we already talked about if we're using SIP trunks, let's set up that external host. Again, that's in PBX SIP NAT if you didn't catch it before. All right. How to set up your inbound and outbound routes. So we're going to go to extensions and trunk, and let's do the easy one first. That's the outbound routes. So we've already got our trunks made, and we add some rules. It's possible to put all of these in one rule and send it all with the same privilege level and just do it. I don't recommend that. You need people to be able to do things differently than each other. For example, you want every person in existence to be able to call 911. So we're going to make a path for that. When 911 is called, and that's represented by the underscore 911. And if you're not sure about this terminology, hover over the word pattern here, and it'll give you a good explanation of what you can use for letters and numbers and periods and exclamations and what they mean. Once you've got your path here, underscore 911, you can choose if the route needs a password or a PIN or anything like that. By default, I don't mess with any of this stuff. I just give it a privilege level. And the privilege level is internal, which means anyone at all can use this rule. You can enable source filter on caller ID, which disables the privilege level and lets you pick which extensions can use it. But we want everybody to use it, so we're not going to use that. We're going to leave it internal. And it warns us. It's potential security risk because anybody can do it. So you wouldn't want to set your international route with an internal level. Anyway, what path is it going to take? Which trunk is it going to use? It's going to use PX1. Is it going to strip or prepend any digits? No. What about the backup trunk? We're going to add a failover trunk. If PX1 fails, I want it to use PX5. And then I have to save that down here, and it moves the failover into here. So any failover trunks you add have to be saved down here to be added to the order. If you don't save it down here, it's not going to save. Now we don't want to use the analog trunk. I was just showing you that it would add. And I save that route. Now it's going to warn me again that internal level means anyone can use it, and that's risky. We're going to add another one. Some people have local numbers. And if you have a local number, it's usually 7 digits long. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it doesn't matter if I use capital X's or lowercase x's, so if you like to see it differently, I can see 3 digits followed by 4 digits, but it's still X's, so it doesn't matter. X represents any number, any digit from 0 to 9. And I realize I could use Z's and I could use N's, but I use X's for almost everything because it's simpler. Now, most providers won't accept a 7-digit number anymore, but a lot of smaller companies still like to dial their 7-digit numbers. We can accommodate that. So you put in this route for 7 digits. This one we're going to set to local permissions. So not quite anybody, but any extension that has local rights will be able to use this route. The first place they're going to try is PX1, but our provider needs a 1 and the area code. So we're going to say the area code is 888. So we're going to strip no digits, and we're going to prepend a 1888. That will put the 1888 onto any 7-digit number before it sends it out this trunk. So even though our provider doesn't accept 7-digit numbers, our phone system can. And then add what it needs on and send it out. We're going to do the same thing here. Now some providers don't require the 1, but we're going to pretend like ours does, just for the sake of showing you. The next route you will need is long distance. Now if your provider accepts if your provider accepts both 10 and 11-digit numbers, you can go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see how I use the capital X's to show the middle three numbers so you can count easier. Now this would work. I could do this because if I had a provider that accepted both 10 and 11-digit numbers. Now in our case, we don't have that. So we're going to call this 10-digit. And this requires national rights because this is kind of a long distance call. And it's going to use PX1. We're not going to strip anything, but we're going to prepend the 1 on there. And then we have to do the same thing for our failover trunk. And save. And because we have two different ways people dial out, _1, national rights, PX1. Now, we don't have to strip or prepend anything for this one. We just have to say it's allowed to go. And that adds the 11-digit. Now, here's the weird one. A lot of people don't do this one. And I call it plus. Sometimes a incoming call will have a plus sign at the start of it. So you'll see +1 followed by the number. So when you try to call out from your own call log, it says, I don't know how to process that number. And the phone will send the call because we tell it to, and it looks like this, +1 followed by 10 digits. And the system doesn't know what to do with it. But we're smart enough, we know what to do with it. We should take off the plus sign and send it anyway. So that's what we're going to tell it. I want you to strip off 1 digit and send it anyway. And that 1 digit will be the plus sign. And even though each path that we chose is national rights, we had to make 3 different routes to accommodate the 3 different types of numbers that might go out. The last one is international. Very simple. Underscore, every international call starts with 011, followed by a number and any number of digits that you want, period. If you hover over here, you'll see that the period is a wildcard matching 1 or more characters. So I could actually get away with 011 dot, and that would be fine too. But I like my X's, so I do that. Because it's 011 followed by any number of digits. And when you're done and your timer hits, it will send the call. But we don't want anybody to be able to call internationally. So we set this one to the highest level of rights possible. And we do the same thing. Still PX1, don't strip or prepend anything, and then PX5. So I have my primary route and my failover. And those are my outbound routes. Now if I wanted custom routes or things going to peered trunks and stuff like that, we can do all of that too. But for the sake of simplicity, this is a working phone system. You can call your 911, you can call locally, you can call long distance, and you can call internationally. And you can limit these any way you see fit. Now the inbound routes are similar. A little more complicated with the possibilities that are there, but they're not too bad. So how to create inbound routes. So again, under extension trunks, click on inbound routes, and you can see up at the top here we have trunks. Analog 1, PX1, PX5. We have to create our inbound routes separately for each trunk. So with our SIP trunks, anything I do on PX1, I also have to do again on PX5. Now if we would have used one of those trunk groups, which we couldn't do for our setup, but if we were using one, we had 5 trunks in one, then you only have to do it on one inbound route and you're good. So we're going to start here by hitting add. and we're going to look at what we've created. Let's start with 888-555-1230. The first thing you have to know is how the provider is going to send the call to you. Underscore, that means let's start on my pattern. Are they going to send it like this? Where's it? 1230. Or are they going to send it like this? You don't need them both. But if they send it with the 1 and you don't have the 1 on there, it's not going to work. And if they don't send it with a 1, but you only have the 1 on there, it's not going to work. If you put both of them in there, it doesn't matter, it will work. But then you have to do that for every single one. So if you know how your provider sends the calls, then you only need one of these in there, not both. So we're going to say that our provider sends it with the 1, and it comes in 888-555-1230. Where does it go? It goes to IVR 1. So we're going to go and look at the path here. We don't mess with the caller ID pattern. We don't prepend anything. We don't tag an alert info, any of that. We go right down to default destination. And it's going to an IVR. IVR 1. Now if we had after hour options and holiday options, you would add those in here. You'd say outside of office time, I want it to go to voicemail or something like that. And you can send it differently based on the time conditions that you set up. But just like the failover routes, if you don't hit save here, it's not going to go into place. You've got to hit save down here or it won't save. Like say on holidays, we're going to go to IVR 2. So this route says if this number is dialed during normal hours, normal operations, by default, it's just going to go here, straight to IVR 1. If it's outside of office time, we're going to dump it to voicemail, and if it's on a holiday, we're going to dump it to IVR 2. So it can do 3 different things based on the time condition. Whatever I do on this trunk, I have to duplicate on PX5. And I have to do the exact same thing. 888-555-1230. And default destination, IVR 1, failover, out of office time, go to voicemail, save, failover, holidays, go to IVR 2. Now this is the only one I'm going to put the time failovers on. I wanted to show you what it would look like. We can get more specific with this and choose even specific time conditions and narrow it down on Mondays from 5 to 3, do this. But we're not going to look at all that right now. Once you have that in, save, and it is now on both trunks. If it's on one and the call fails over to the second trunk, it doesn't know what to do with it. So it's got to be on both trunks that you have if you use failover trunks. Let's look at the next one. Going to ring group 2. And because we've already created all these, we can now do our inbound routes. Get our phone number right. We don't need a failover, so that route's good. And this is what you do, again, for PX5. I'm going to skip PX5 for now, just for the sake of time. This one, go back to my thing, call Q1. And each number can go to a different place. Underscore 1-888-555-1233 is going to outside number. So just going down, external number. Tell it right where it's going. The call will come in, not even do anything on the system, and immediately call out and forward to that number. Now your SIP provider has to allow that as well. So if your SIP provider won't allow for that to happen, then the call will fail no matter what you do. One, two, three, four. Goes straight to voicemail. Now you can see on here how you can track all of these. The numbers go in the order that you entered them, and they're not movable. So whatever way you put them in is the way you want to see them. If you want to see them numerically in order over here, enter them in numerically in order over here. Unfortunately, there's no way to... Oh, is there? Oh, you can sort them out. Ah, nice. Cool. So it looks like the first two tabs now let you sort numerically, which is actually a new feature. Good deal. All right, so the first one, you can see the default goes to IVR 1, and out of office time goes to the voicemail, and on holiday goes to IVR 2. And it breaks it all down for you right here on the one screen. And each of these just go to their respective places. And so you can quickly see where each call is going right on this screen. This is where you go, well, that seems like a lot of work. What if I have 100 different numbers? Well, it's not so bad, as long as your numbers are sequential. So this last one, 800, 555, 6200 to 6300. Each extension that we created is going to get its own DID, a direct inbound dial that goes straight from their number. So 6200 will go straight to 1200. 6201 will go to 1201. So on, all the way up to 6300 will go to 1300. And you can do this with as many extensions as you want, but I'm going to show you how to route it in one easy route. So we add in the numbers. Let's see if I can do this right. Underscore 1 888 555 6XXX, because it's the last three digits that can be anything. But all the numbers are starting with 800, or I did 800, 555, 6, 200 to 6, 300. So after the 6 is when they change. Fix that here. It should be 800. And so you put X's in for the ones that are unknown. Now here's where it gets neat. Down here under default destination, one of the options is by DID. And that allows you to bring in all of those, and the allowed DID extensions right now is just an extension. You can actually route like that to conference rooms or call queues or ring groups or anything like that if you so chose. The most common way to do it is by extension. So it's looking for extensions that match what I tell it. And the way it's going to match, we're going to strip off, starting from the left, we're going to strip off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 digits. Nope. Let's look at it again. 8 digits? Yeah, 8 digits. 4 and 4. So we're going to strip off the first 8 digits, replace it with a 1, and keep what's left. So we're going to strip off 8 digits, prepend a 1. So if the number 6200 came in, it would strip off everything except for the 200, and then it would put a 1 on the front of it, which would be 1200. So the first number would route to 1200. And we save it. And so it's by DID, strip off all 8 digits that's come in at the start, and this is where it's important that you know whether they send the 1 or not. So this one matters. You have to know how they send it. And you strip off all the first digits, prepend the number. So this only works if the extensions are sequential. You can even do this if you don't own a few numbers in the middle, because you just won't receive them, and that's fine. But you can do the whole stretch of an entire sequence of numbers very, very quickly doing it this way. So you have to do this, like I said, again, on PX5. PX5 here, the second trunk has to look exactly like the first one. Otherwise, when the calls fail over, they simply won't work. And that's it. That's how you set up your inbound routes. Once you have your inbound routes and your outbound routes and your trunks are going, you should be ready to go. You should be able to make calls. So we're going to apply these changes and see what we look like. All right, system status, dashboard. We have working trunks. We have extensions that currently aren't connected to any phones yet. And we have outbound routes and inbound routes. So calls can come in, calls can go out. We have voicemail set up. That's the basics of our system. At this point, your system is set up. It can function as of right now. But there are some fine-tuning items to look at. And right now I'm not going to teach you how to connect your phones to your extensions and go through all of those settings. But that video will come in the future. For now, we just wanted to get you a working Grandstream system. But I am going to quickly go over the other miscellaneous settings that you will need to mess with. So we have opened our system up to the rest of the world. And that means that people can attack us if they want. So we need to go to security settings, which is under system settings and security. And we need to turn on the ability to block people when they start to come in. So that's in security settings. It's called fail to ban, and you just have to turn it on. I also turn on the asterisk service and the login attack defense. So if people are trying to log in on port 8089 or 5060, if you enable other ports, it'll activate those checkboxes as well. If you know your SIP provider's IP address, you can enter in the whitelist. If you use the, what is it? Service check. If you use the service check, you need to come into here and whitelist yourself. I usually whitelist a lot of things. For example, my local networks, I whitelist, that's my SIP provider. That's the other SIP trunk. So this is PX1, this one's PX5. That's myself, in case I accidentally do that. But there's lots of things you can whitelist to protect yourself. If you have somebody out in the world that is remotely connecting their phone in, you'll want to whitelist them so they can't accidentally get banned. But once you turn this on, anybody that attempts to log in and fails 5 times within 600 seconds, which is 10 minutes, then they're banned for 10 minutes. I usually change this one to 86,400 because there's 86,400 seconds in a day. And so it'll ban them for the whole day. Anybody that gets banned shows up down here. So that's how you block that particular side of things. Parking slots. A lot of people like to use parking slots, and they like to have speed dial buttons for them. If you do that, you need to come into parking lot under call features and say treat parking lots as extensions. One little setting change. Super duper helpful. What other miscellaneous settings we got? We talked about PBX, SIP, NAT. Talked about security, time. You need to make sure your time zone's right. Set your office time and set up your holidays. It's important. Email settings. Configure your email settings. It's important. Users. Have backup users. Do not give everybody your admin password. We talked about the operation log at one point. Everything gets logged here, but not everything gets logged in system events. So come in here and turn on all of your alerts. You can get email notifications if you want, but that gets kind of excessive. Upgrade regularly. If you're going to upgrade, back up always. System cleanups helps you keep the system clean. And at the very bottom here, 0 config. This is a quick, easy way to assign extensions to your phones. And I'm not going to go through it now. We don't have phones set up for this. But you can quickly assign 50 extensions to 50 phones with basic settings. You can really customize things with the templates. Finally, when all is said and done, and this is important, please don't forget this, because you will regret it when you have an issue. Because just like any computer, a phone system is a computer, and it will have issues at some point. You need to maintain it. You need to give it upkeep, keep it clean, make sure it's cool, make sure it gets its updates. And as you're doing all of that, make sure you back up. You can do a scheduled backup so it backs up for you, or you can simply come in and add a backup. I want just my config file, or I want everything. If you do just the config file, you can save it locally. It tells the backup file, puts today's date in there, 2018, 8/14. So today is August 14th of 2018. I don't know what this number means. I will often change it to be the version of firmware that I'm working on. 18.9, I think it was, something like that. And so I know what firmware I took that backup from, on what date, and that helps me out sometimes. Click backup, and it will do the process. It's important. Please don't forget it. All right. At that point, we have our backup done. Our system is running. We can test inbound and outbound calls. You can see them in active calls. The dashboard gives you a summary. It even tells us that we now have fail to ban turned on, but we have not set our scheduled backups yet. We have 101 extensions, of which 0 are registered. We have no conference room, but 2 call queues and 20 parking slots. And really, it just tells us a lot of stuff right on this dashboard. So if you have questions for us, please reach out to us, n2vsolutions.com. You can call us at 507-205-4025. If you do call us, you will find me. I will be the guy, one of the guys helping you, and we're happy to do it. We're happy to do remote support. We can reach out to you anywhere in the world and help you set this thing up and keep it maintained. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.